Hello, in this video I'm going to talk to you about AN fittings and hoses and show you how to make them, what is AN hoses, and a few other probably random things that are going to come up. So if you haven't heard of what an AN hose is or an AN fitting, basically if you've seen something that looks like this on race cars, then this is the AN fittings, or these things right here, an AN hose. AN, literally AN together, stands for Army Navy. It was a standardized fitting that was developed, I want to say in the 40s, it might have been the 20s or 30s or 50s, for fittings, especially for fluids. It doesn't matter if they're high pressure or low pressure, and I think it also works for pneumatic, air as well. And it's similar to in commercial cars, production cars. You'll see them. You won't see AN fittings, but a similar type of fitting in the brake line, especially hard brake lines, where they have what they call the 45-degree double flare. And the simple term is the way these seal, there's a 37-degree angle on the inside here, and then on the corresponding male fitting. And just the act of those getting kind of pressed together seals the fitting. For very high pressure applications, it's good for oil and fuel, hydraulic fluid, basically just about anything. And like I said, also I think for air, compressed gases as well. As opposed to the 45-degree angle double flare that's seen in most automobiles, what happens is you actually have a flare that kind of gets bent out and then squished back in on itself. And that's the 45-degree angle flare. It's called double flare. This is a single 37-degree angle flare if you're doing hard lines, like the steel or metal brake lines, hard, not the braided brake line or braided lines. Now, for AN fittings, they're normally like a dash number, so it's like a -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8. I don't know how high up they go. I think it goes into the 20s. Could be more. The ones that you're probably most likely to be working with on a car is going to be -3 to -12-ish, I'm guessing. I don't really know the upper end for a car, but it'll be somewhere probably around 12. So to give you an idea, so what's the dash number mean? The dash number is the number of 1/16 of an inch in diameter. So a -3 is 3/16 of an inch. A -4 is 4/16 of an inch, also known as 1/4, but they'll go by -4. So it's kind of nice. It's a scale that you can easily associate. It's like a 4 is going to be smaller than a 10 or 6. So to give you perspective, a -3 would be like a brake line. So that'd be something like this. And I'll show you a little bit closer up, but you might see this. For instance, you might buy a stainless steel brake line to go from the chassis to the caliper, for instance, and that would be a -3 line. A -4 might be like a hydraulic clutch line. A -6 could be like a fuel line. A -10, which is what this is, so in comparison, this is an oil line that I made for Accusump system, or I guess you'd call it a oil accumulator, would be the generic term. And so a -10 is 10/16 of an inch, which is 5/8. So of an inch diameter. So that'll be the diameter here. Why are these fittings so popular and awesome and cool? There's a number of reasons. One is they're pretty much supposed to be indestructible if you put them together right. You should never have a failure with this. I mean, maybe over time, if you have some rubbing or chafing, or maybe the rubber on the inside eventually over a long period of time might corrode or rot out. The other thing, these fittings are reusable. I could take this fitting off and reuse it onto a different hose, which is pretty awesome. They also swivel in multiple ways. So like I can install this and I can swivel it this way and then also this way. So you're not locked into a really solid. They're aluminum, so they're a little bit lighter, but mostly it's the fact that they're really durable. They're very clean looking. They're very adjustable. and they're very good and they're reusable. The 37-degree flare is reusable multiple times. You're supposed to be able to take this off, put it on, multiple times. Whereas I was talking about that 45-degree double flare, what happens is once it's kind of bent over on itself and you actually use it for the first time, it crushes that flare, and then you start getting fatiguing on the rim, and then it eventually can fail. So it's not really supposed to be reusable. I mean, you can take them off and put them back on, with really unlikely to have an issue unless you're to do it multiple times, and eventually you might have a failure. So these can be used multiple times. Now, to make one of these isn't that hard, and it really doesn't require a lot of tools. In fact, you can use very minimal tools and get the job done, or you can buy a few extra tools that aren't that expensive and really make the job like 10 times easier. And I'll go through the steps on how I make this particular hose right here in a moment. But just to go over some of the tools that will make life a little easier, let me show you those now. First off, for cutting the hoses, using these cable cutters is probably the preferred method. It seems like this is becoming more and more common. You can use a hacksaw, you can use a cutoff wheel, there's various other methods, but I'm starting to see this as being the preferred method, and I'm definitely had success with it. I think this tool right here will cost you somewhere around $20 to $35. $35 on Summit Racing, I'm pretty sure. I think you can find them online somewhere for like 20 bucks. Like I said, this is called a cable cutter, and it works pretty well. I've used it up to -10 AN fittings, and it works great. Sharpie is always good for marking lengths and such, so always handy to have. Duct tape or Gorilla Tape or something similar. You're going to need this. This is really a necessary tool. This isn't as necessary. Like I said, you can get away with a hacksaw, but you might get fraying, more fraying on the stainless steel braided portion when you cut it, so I think this is more preferable. An aluminum wrench. I got this crescent wrench. I think it was only 10 bucks online somewhere. They go for like 35 bucks or more. You can get individual like open-end box wrenches, open-ended wrenches that are like $10 a piece. But if you're going to be using different sizes, this is kind of handy. The reason you use the aluminum one is that it's not, the aluminum on the aluminum is less likely to cause damage. So aluminum soft, steel isn't, so if you use a steel wrench, you're more likely to scar these surfaces when you're adjusting and tightening this. So that's why a wrench is handy. Not necessary, but handy. You will need standard size wrenches. Another optional tool is soft jaws on a vise and soft jaws. Now the vise itself might be expensive, but the soft jaws are relatively inexpensive. I think these are like $15 to $20, I can't remember. Look them up. Like I said, soft jaws. These are really handy for holding things like the hose fittings when you're starting to put them on. You'll see that in just a second. I can't express how much easier that makes life, because otherwise you're going to be using two wrenches to try to do the same job. So I would definitely look at getting a vise in general, because it's just handy for automotive work to hold stuff while you're working on it. But also then invest in these magnetic soft jaws. Man, huge, huge, huge difference. And then last but not least is maybe a little bit of motor oil. Unused, unopened, well, it doesn't have to be unopened, but unused motor oil is good for lubricating, and you'll see what I'm talking about shortly. Not necessary, but definitely helpful. Now you can get a different adapter fittings. This, for instance, is a 90-degree. It has a 1/2-inch NPT, National Pipe Thread, on one side. It has a -10 AN thread on the other. You can see the taper right here, which is characteristic of the AN fitting. And now you can use this to connect to various things, such as an AccuSump, which I'm going to be using this on, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Alright, here's the inside of my car. Now I'm installing the AccuSump, which is that little cylinder right here, approximately in that position in the passenger footwell. You can see I've attached an AN fitting here because it's a 1/2 inch NPT thread that's on that valve there. Now I'm going to be running a line basically 90 degrees through this hole. It's going to go on the bottom of the car. It's going to come through here. I'm going to attach it to this right here. This is just a plastic cover over bulkhead fitting. So now you can see the fitting there. Now inside the engine compartment, which I'll show you shortly. So now I'm going to measure. I'm going to take the fittings and I'm going to hold them up, screw them on. I'm going to measure how much line I'm going to need to traverse this distance so I can make my cut. Okay, so I have the AccuSump where I want it, approximately. I have the fitting on. I've actually screwed on the end fitting for the hose. Here's the hose. I'm lining it up, already taped. Have the fitting that I'm going to be connecting to on the other side already screwed in and taped to it so that it's held in place. Now I'm going to try to figure out how much line I'm going to need. Some cases you're going to need to be fairly accurate. In this particular instance, I don't. I have a little bit of slop that I can play with as far as the exact fitting of this location. So I'm going to err a little bit on the long side. I'm going to make my mark, approximately where I'm going to cut it. Now what you're lining up to is right here, because this is how far the hose will go in. You're not lining up to this end. And then there's quite a distance here. So that's why it's important to have the fitting on when you're checking the length. Now sometimes in tight situations I've used string and taken this portion off, taped it, and then kind of stretched the string out or like rope to help getting the right distance, because sometimes it's a little more critical than others. In this particular case I have a lot of leeway that I can use. So I got my mark, now I can make my fitting, or my hose. So I got my hose here. Now I need to cut the line. It looks like I need to cut it right here. Now I marked it on this hose, but I need to tape it. So I grabbed some duct tape, Gorilla tape, I like the heavier duty duct tape. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to tape it. Just tape it in the middle. Since mine isn't a super critical line up here, I'm just going to try to tape the middle. It's going to cover the mark. And then I'll just remark it. Just in the middle here. And now I need to cut it. So, as I said before, it really comes down to what tools you have available. This is where an example where the vise becomes really handy, because now what I can do with the soft jaws is I can take this hose and I can stick it in the soft jaws. Right there. Give myself a little room to cut with. Just tight enough to hold it in place. Now I can take my cutters and go in and snip it without having to worry about trying to hold it too. I'll move this out of the way. And now the idea is to try to keep it as perpendicular and level as possible. So I'm just going to stretch that a little bit. I might actually put this on my head for a sec here, just so that it's straight. Cut, fell down, okay. Now I'm going to straighten out the end. I'm going to show you a close-up here real quick. So this is freshly cut. It kind of pinches it, so I'm going to try to straighten it out just a little bit here, just to get it nice and round again. And now I'm going to take this out. I'm going to peel these, just magnet in. It's hard working around the camera. I'm going to peel the duct tape off. I'm going to pull upwards. I don't want to pull any of the metal strands down. I don't want them to fray, because it'll make life a little harder. So now it's cut. I'm ready to stick my end in. Okay, so the hose is here. I'm going to put it down for a sec. Here's the fitting. So the fitting, you unscrew this portion right here. Now just to give you an idea what's going to happen. This is a lot of threads, just a sec. Now the hose is going to get seated all the way to the top of this, right up to where my thumb is. This is going to get screwed down into it. This portion right here will actually go to the inside of the hose, and it will squeeze the hose between here and the wall of this fitting right here. So first step is now I'm going to put this on the end of the hose. So this is why it's important not to have any it fray at all, because you want to get this in real clean. And notice it's threaded on the inside. So I'm going to put this on and I'm going to screw it on, just like I would a nut or a bolt. I'm going to make sure it's seated all the way to the bottom of these threads here. Now with that in place, and this is where the soft jaws are handy again, I'm going to open up these jaws and I'm going to stick this in here, and it's going to hold it in place for me. It's like a third hand. Alright, I'm going to actually, just a sec. I'm going to have it stick up just a little bit from the soft jaws because I want room for my wrench. Oops. It's hard to do around the camera. Alright, now it doesn't have to be really tight, just as long as it doesn't rotate, but you don't want to crush it, it's aluminum. So now we're ready to insert this fitting into the hose here. Now what I like to do is I'm going to put a little bit of oil just right here, because what happens is this has to get inserted inside the hose, and this will just help it slide in and help the threads start to engage. So you'll see I'll push. Now one thing that I want to be clear is you want to make sure that when you push this in, that the hose doesn't get pushed out of this portion of the thread. So as you do it, a lot of people mark at the bottom here. I'm just going to watch. I'm going to hold it down below. Oh, I got a sliver, but I'm going to hold it here. I'm going to insert. Now when I push down so the threads aren't in, it's going to take a little bit of engagement. I'm just double checking. It just kind of seemed to go in really easy. Sometimes you catch the lip. There you go. And the side of the hose, and you rip it. This one's actually going in really easily. Almost worries me. Now I'm watching the side here to make sure it's not getting pushed out the bottom. That happens sometimes too. I'm going to take this wrench, and again I'm using this aluminum one because it's less likely to damage the aluminum fitting. It's just going to make it a little easier for me. And again, I'm watching the side to make sure it's not getting pushed out. If it hasn't gotten pushed out yet, it's probably not going to, but it's still safe. Now it's going to get tough to turn. Whew. The only thing I don't want to do sorry, it's not hard with the camera on the tripod right there. Is this top blue part has to sit flush on top of the red part. So just getting it there. Alright, so now it's there. Now you could do that with 2 wrenches, but this is 100 times easier. These things cost, I think it was 15-20 bucks. The vise might be expensive if you don't have a vise, but well worth it. Makes life a lot easier. Now, so this will swivel, just an FYI. So this, you don't have to worry about the orientation of this or where it stops, because this swivels, and this swivels here too. So when you do the install, that's not a big deal, the orientation with this. But that's pretty much it. This hose should be pretty much leak proof. I don't see, it was lined up with the bottom of this really well. When I inserted the hose, it lined up with the bottom of the threads very cleanly. It didn't push out at all. I don't see any reason why this, if you want to test it, you can always pull on it. Why this one would fail. I mean, it's still possible, but you know, I think highly unlikely. Now I just need to do the other end, and then I'll have a fully built. So this is just to give you an idea of what I got from Summit Racing here. Now I think their fittings, their end fittings tend to be pretty good, but you're going to want to make sure that if you're going to use this, I may have to end up just recutting this just slightly lower down. I mean, this is pretty crazy here. It's pretty frayed. Obviously, whoever cut it was in a hurry or hadn't done this before. So your best bet might be just to cut this. I should have considered that before I fitted the hose, because it's going to leave me a little shorter than I'd like it to be. But so I might try to salvage it. But just as an FYI in the future, it's something I didn't think about until I pulled off the plastic cap that Summit provides to keep the hose from fraying. Well, this one's already starting to fray. So here's my car that I'm working on, my MR2. I had a problem with the engine. I think I had oil starvation issues, so I'm putting in an AccuSump or a oil accumulator. Now that is what all this plumbing is for. There's a remote oil filter set up here. There will be an oil filter that attaches to that magenta bracket thing there, and basically the oil is going to come out of the engine here. There's an adapter on where the oil filter used to go that has fittings on it that I can attach these to. So one comes out, goes into the oil filter, comes out of the oil filter, down this line. That little black bit right there is a one-way valve. Then it goes into the bulkhead fitting and into back into the engine. Now what happens is the reason I have a one-way valve there is that when the oil accumulator starts pumping oil back into the engine, it won't pump it back into the filter. So it prevents the oil from going back that way. And I'll explain what the oil accumulator is here in a moment. But yeah, so now the oil goes back into the engine there, and if I ever lose oil pressure, it'll hopefully never lose oil pressure with the accumulator. So this is the oil accumulator I was messing with earlier. So it's basically a cylinder with a piston in it. You put a little bit of air pressure on one side. There's actually air pressure gauge here, and there's a fitting right here. There's a Schrader fitting, just like you'd have on a bike. Add a little air pressure. It pushes that cylinder down to this side. You hook up the oil to the engine on this side. This is a valve to open and close it, electronic valve. Not necessary for the function, but it makes it easier. Air pressure pushes the piston down. Oil pressure builds in the engine. You get up to 60 psi. Will push that cylinder back and fill this with oil. If there's ever a pressure drop in the engine, it'll push that oil back into the engine to prevent oil starvation. And that's essentially how it works. It's about, I don't know, $600 setup here, I think. $400 or so for that, and then like another $150 for the valve. So hopefully it'll save my engine. Well, hope you found the video helpful. If you liked it, please subscribe, give a thumbs up and subscribe. Hope to shoot more informational videos here in the near future, especially on car stuff. I do a lot of photography stuff. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. I'll have some links popping up here shortly to other similar videos, and I'll also have links down below to my photography blog, which may or may not interest you, and maybe a few other things that I might find interesting. Just a side note, this is Crazy Leo. He's a Canadian rally racer. I'm a fan of him. He doesn't sponsor me or anything like that, but I figure I'd give him some props just because I like how the guy rolls. He's a little crazy. He did run in WRC for a short period, maybe it was only a year or so. I don't remember off the top of my head. He ran, I seen him at Snowdrift up in Michigan. That's where I've run into him a few times. And so I figured I'd give him a little bit of a plug. He's doing a rally school outside of Toronto, an hour and a half or so outside of Toronto, if you're interested. So thank you very much, and take care.